Hello, friends, you're on the Point of Darkness channel. Today I'm launching a project on my channel called Visiting Abandoned Hospitals. It will consist of several parts, released every 2 days. Enjoy! I never considered myself someone who was easy to scare. Over the last few years, I had explored dozens of abandoned places. Old factories, schools, closed hotels, subway stations flooded long ago. I always liked that feeling of walking into a place where time had completely stopped, but no place ever left me with the same feeling I experienced after visiting Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. It was located several hours outside the city, a massive complex hidden deep in the woods. Years ago, people with severe mental disorders were treated there. The hospital was shut down in the early 2000s after multiple scandals connected to patient abuse. Locals avoided talking about the place. Even online, there was barely any information, just old photographs, faded articles, and a few forums where people repeated the same thing. It felt wrong inside. I arrived there close to evening. The sky was gray, and the sun barely pushed through the thick clouds. The road leading to the complex stretched through a long forest. The farther I drove, the quieter everything became. Even the radio in my car started picking up static. Eventually I turned it off completely. When the main building appeared between the trees, I instinctively slowed down. The place looked far too massive for its surroundings. 6 floors, long rows of windows. Some were boarded shut, others completely shattered. The center of the building looked almost like an old university mixed with a prison. It felt as if the empty black windows were staring directly at the road. Near the entrance stood a rusted sign with the hospital's name barely visible anymore. Broken glass crunched under my boots. The air felt strange, cold, damp, and carrying a smell that reminded me of mold, old medicine, and something else I couldn't properly describe. I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the silence. Not normal silence, not the kind you feel in an abandoned building. This silence was different, the kind where your own breathing suddenly sounds too loud. The main hall was enormous. Pieces of the ceiling covered the floor. Rusted wheelchairs sat near the walls. Old medical carts were tipped over in corners. Somewhere above me, water slowly dripped through the building. Every sound echoed through the empty floors as if the hospital itself repeated it back. I took several steps forward, and almost immediately, I felt like I wasn't alone. It's difficult to explain. You don't see anyone, you don't hear footsteps, but your mind keeps telling you that something is watching. I tried convincing myself it was only the darkness and unfamiliar surroundings, but the deeper I went, the stronger the feeling became. The hallway stretched endlessly in different directions, long, silent, endless. The white paint on the walls had peeled away years ago. In some places, there were still writings left by patients, names, dates, strange messages. On one wall someone had written, "Don't look through the door window at night." The paint had dripped downward like the person who wrote it had trembling hands. I stopped near an old nurse station. Papers were scattered across the desk. Patient files, medical reports, soaked pages stuck together from moisture. One photograph caught my attention. A man staring directly into the camera with a completely empty expression. The kind of stare that looked beyond you, as if the person had stopped understanding where he even was. That was when I heard it, a metallic sound somewhere deep inside the building, like something heavy being dragged slowly across the floor. I immediately looked up. Silence. Then again to scrape. Very far away. I pointed the flashlight down the hallway, but saw nothing except darkness. The worst thing about places like this is how your imagination slowly turns against you. The longer you stand in silence, the more your brain tries to create shapes inside the dark. Several times I thought someone was standing at the end of a hallway, but when I focused the flashlight longer, it was only a broken door or hanging fabric. I made my way to the second floor. The staircase creaked loudly beneath every step, so loudly that it felt like the entire hospital could hear me moving upstairs. The air felt heavier. A long corridor stretched forward with patient rooms on both sides. Some doors were open, others remained closed, and somehow the closed doors felt far worse. As you walked past them, your mind kept imagining someone standing quietly on the other side, listening, waiting. I entered one of the rooms. Small, cold, a rusted bed frame stood against the wall. Leather restraints were still attached to the metal rails. In the corner of the room lay a small child's shoe. The hopelessness inside that room was overwhelming. On the wall, Someone had scratched the same word over and over. Again, quiet, again, and again. And again. I was about to leave when I heard a sound directly outside the room. A slow footstep. I froze. Instantly. My heartbeat became so loud I could hear blood rushing in my ears. Then another step. Slow. Heavy. I rushed into the hallway and pointed the flashlight in both directions. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the feeling remained. Like someone had just been standing inches away from the doorway. I kept trying to stay rational. Old buildings make sounds. Metal shifts. Water moves through pipes. Wind pushes doors. But those explanations slowly stopped helping. After a while I noticed something strange. There was barely any graffiti inside the hospital. Most abandoned places are completely covered in it. But here, the walls remained mostly untouched. Almost as if people didn't stay long enough inside to leave anything behind. I continued deeper into the building. The flashlight illuminated old wheelchairs, medical trolleys, broken mirrors, and every reflection made me flinch. Inside abandoned places, you slowly begin fearing your own silhouette. The darkness distorts everything. At one point I thought I saw someone moving through a side corridor. I heard the faint sound of fabric brushing against a wall. Almost silent, I moved quickly toward it. Nothing. Only an abandoned cafeteria, tables overturned. Broken dishes scattered across the floor. And in the center of the room stood an old piano covered in dust. Several keys were pressed down, and, for some reason, standing there filled me with an overwhelming urge to leave. Some places don't scare you instantly. The fear builds slowly, like pressure, and after several hours inside Blackwood, it felt like the building itself was pressing down on my mind, like the walls were slowly pushing normal thoughts out of my head. Eventually, I found my way into the basement. That was probably the worst decision of the entire trip. Almost no natural light reached down there. The air was freezing. The basement contained old technical rooms, laundry areas, and the morgue. As I walked through the corridor, my footsteps sounded different. Hollow. As if the floor beneath me was empty. Every few moments I thought I could hear breathing somewhere nearby. Quiet. Uneven. But every time I stopped moving, the silence became absolute. I eventually discovered an archive room, shelves overflowing with documents, medical files, doctor notes, patient photographs. Some of the people in those pictures looked so exhausted and broken that it was difficult to keep looking. One photograph disturbed me more than the others. A man sitting in the corner of a room staring directly into the camera. Below the picture was a date, only months before the hospital shut down. I placed the photograph back, and at that exact moment, somewhere in the basement, a door slammed shut. The sound exploded through the corridor. I physically jumped. Then silence returned immediately. That was when I finally understood why people described this place so strangely. The hospital didn't scare you with anything specific. It slowly destroyed your sense of safety. It made you feel like you had entered a place where humans were never supposed to stay. I continued through the basement until I reached another long hallway lined with heavy metal doors, some slightly open. Others shut completely. At the very end of the corridor stood a medical stretcher. Old. Rust covered. And although I knew it was only an object, something about seeing it there made my stomach tighten. As I got closer, one of the wheels moved slightly, probably because of air movement. But in that moment, real fear finally hit me. Not panic. Not movie-style terror. A cold, instinctive fear. The kind where your body quietly tells you to leave. Immediately, I started moving back upstairs much faster. And that was when the strangest thing happened. Halfway up the staircase, I heard footsteps above me. Slow. Careful. Not the building creaking. Actual footsteps. One. Pause. Another. I switched off my flashlight. Darkness swallowed almost everything. Instantly. And inside that darkness, I heard something else. A faint scraping sound, like someone slowly dragging their hand across a wall. I stood frozen on the stairs. Every second felt painfully long. Then suddenly everything stopped. Complete silence. I turned the flashlight back on and reached the upper floor. The hallway was empty, but the feeling of being watched had become unbearable. I no longer wanted to explore. I just wanted to leave. I started walking back toward the main hall, and the entire time, it felt like something was following behind me. Not close, keeping distance. Slowly. Every few moments I turned around quickly. Nothing. Only endless dark corridors. As I passed one of the offices, The flashlight briefly reflected against the glass window in the door. For a split second, I thought someone was sitting inside. I immediately pointed the light back. Empty. Just an old chair, nothing else. But that moment made me realize something. This hospital somehow forced you to question your own senses. You stopped trusting your eyes, your hearing, even your own thoughts. By the time I reached the main hall again, darkness had already started falling outside. The gray daylight was disappearing, and with it, the hospital somehow became even worse. The shadows inside the corridors deepened. Entire sections of the building vanished into blackness. And at that moment, I realized one thing very clearly. I did not want to remain inside this place after sunset. Not even for another minute. I headed toward the exit, and while crossing the hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that the entire building was watching me leave. Not a person, not a ghost. The hospital itself. As if decades of fear, suffering, and hopelessness had soaked into the walls and never truly disappeared. When I finally stepped outside, the air immediately felt lighter. I hadn't even realized how difficult breathing inside had become. The forest around the complex was already darkening. Wind moved through the trees. I walked quickly toward my car, trying not to look back at the upper windows. But before getting inside, I turned around anyway. The main building stood there in the last traces of evening light. Dark windows, long corridors hidden behind them, empty patient rooms. And suddenly I felt something deeply unsettling, like the hospital didn't want me to leave, like it had been watching the entire time. Studying. Waiting. I got into the car and locked the doors. Immediately. The moment the engine started, I felt slightly safer. But even while driving through the forest road, I kept checking the rearview mirror. It felt like somewhere behind the trees, the silhouette of Blackwood was still there. Dark. Massive. Completely motionless. And the worst part is that after enough time passed, I realized something. I'm not afraid of ghosts. I'm not afraid of monsters. What truly scares me is the thought of how much human fear still remains trapped inside places like that. Sometimes, late at night, I still remember those corridors, that crushing silence, those closed doors, and the feeling that something was staring directly into my soul. I still explore abandoned places, but I never return to Blackwood. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. Because some places only appear empty from the outside. Inside, something still remains. Maybe not a person, maybe not a monster, just the memory of everything people suffered there. And sometimes I think that was the most terrifying part of all. Not seeing something in the darkness, but realizing the darkness had been watching you first.
Friends, thank you for watching to the end. If you don't mind, please support me with a like and a subscription. I'll see this and will make more and better videos. Thank you for your attention.